Hello, and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. My name is Sarah Ganzel, and I am the programming officer for the Royal Heraldry Society of Canada. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the second installment of the Society's 2024 online lecture series. Initially conceived in honor of the late Dr. Claire Boudreau, this series endeavors to make innovative research on heraldry and historically adjacent topics accessible and engaging to our community and beyond. Please keep an eye on your inboxes and on our socials for more details on the third lecture of the series coming in September. And I would also like to remind you all that registration for the annual general meeting is now open, which is going to be held in Toronto on June 7th through 9th. And it's going to feature two speakers from the Canadian Heraldic Authority, so it should be really cool. So that is open. Anyway, I am honored to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Anne-Marie Rasmussen. Dr. Rasmussen joined the University of Waterloo in 2015 as the John G. Diefenbacher Memorial Chair in German Literary Studies after having been a faculty member in the Department of Germanic Languages and Literature at Duke University in North Carolina for 25 years. Born and raised in the southern Willamette Valley of Oregon, she received her BA from the University of Oregon and her PhD from Yale University, both in the field of Germanic languages and literatures. Her areas of expertise are medieval studies, German studies, and gender studies. She is the author of Mothers and Daughters in Medieval German Literature, co-editor of Medieval Woman's Song, Ladies, Whores, and Holy Women, a source book in courtly, religious, and urban cultures of late medieval Germany, and Visuality and Materiality in the Story of Tristan and Isolde, and editor of Rivalrous Masculinities. Her book, Medieval Badges, Their Wearers and Their Worlds, was awarded honorable mention by the German Studies Association Book Prize Committee in 2022. Today, Dr. Rasmussen will be examining intersections between heraldry and the sign systems of medieval badges, which, for those of you who don't know, were small mass-produced objects with familiar images that were pinned or sewn onto clothing and which medieval people used to create and claim social relationships in all spheres of life. Dr. Rasmussen's lecture will incorporate the use of Zoom breakout rooms at regular intervals to allow you all to engage with the material and to get to know one another better. While I would ask that everyone mutes their mics during Dr. Rasmussen's talk, I would also encourage you all to speak freely amongst yourselves during the breakout room portions. In the last 30 minutes of this roughly 90-minute Zoom event, there will be 2 rounds of Q&A to which everyone is invited to contribute. So for that portion, please leave your questions for Dr. Rasmussen in the chat or use the raise hand function if you would like to ask questions yourself. And now, without further ado, please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Anne-Marie Rasmussen.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sarah, especially for organizing this talk and pulling things together in such a timely and orderly way. Can I also give a shout out here, please, to the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, which funded an insight grant on medieval badges. The grant is now concluded, but this funding truly advanced my project in formative ways. This project also, the book was one of the outcomes of the project. And finally, a note to all of you viewing this regarding the slides and the slide captions. These are at times, these captions are more copious than is strictly necessary because they conform to academic citation standards. Please know that reading the captions is not necessary for following the lecture. Heraldry is but one of the complex visual signifying systems that were familiar across medieval Europe. And what I'm going to do in this lecture is discuss another one of these sign systems, the sign systems of badges. In part one, I'm going to sketch an overview of the badges, what they are, how they were made, and how they work. And I'm going to illustrate this by looking closely with you at some pilgrim badges that are depicted on a late medieval altarpiece. Part one is followed by our first breakout room session. Sarah's going to manage the breakout rooms, and there is a discussion prompt. If your group generates questions for me, please hold them for the Q&A at the end of the talk. In part two of my talk, I'm going to focus in on heraldry and secular badges, and I'm going to basically show you some badges that overlap with or refer to heraldry in different ways. There will be a second breakout room at that point. That breakout room has an image of two badges that I've come across in my research that directly refer to heraldry. And I don't know what's going on these badges. So I ask you to take a good look at the badges and discuss in your group what might be going on. I think you have more knowledge. You have a great deal of assembled knowledge amongst you about them. Because we cannot make the slideshow work in the breakout rooms, breakout room 2 will function like this. We'll have the badge, we'll have the slide up with these badges on it quietly for 5 minutes. And I invite you to look really closely, to take some notes, to just look long and hard at these objects and see if you have some ideas about them. Sarah will then put you in your breakout rooms for 10 minutes so that you can compare findings and possibly bring your ideas together. So that will bring us, again, hold questions, please, for the final Q&A. And finally, in a short conclusion to the talk, I'll wrap up by thinking about crossover, by which I mean crossovers between religious and secular badges. And then after that will come the Q&A. So.
Anne Marie, Daryl Kennedy here.
Yes, Daryl.
Could I ask that Dagmar turn off her video? The movie part is very distracting.
Sarah, can you, there she goes. Thank you, Dagmar, for turning off the video. Thank you very much. Yeah, that helps all of us. So, what is a badge? Sarah also already previewed for you a description of what these objects are. They are small objects, sometimes often as small as 2.5 by 2.5 centimeters, although you will see some that were as large as 7 to 8 centimeters. They are brooch-like objects. They are featuring a familiar symbol of some kind. They were made to be pinned or sewn onto clothing where they could be seen easily by others. And the images that they feature were familiar in the Middle Ages. They circulated primarily in Northwestern Europe, even though they are found and were made in other parts of Europe as well. But they appear to have circulated primarily in the Northwest. Their heyday of use is squarely medieval, begins in the 1180s and goes into and up to the Reformation. And there are actually afterlives, you might say, of badges, but they're not going to concern us here today. They were commonly made from, here's a map of Europe, just so we can orient ourselves again with pilgrimage routes. Badges were easy to make and cheap. They were manufactured from lead tin alloys. We would call these pewter. And this was cast as molten ore into a mold that was carved usually from stone. And so these molds could be reused many, many times. I'm going to walk you through what this image shows. On number 1, you have the 2 pieces of the mold. On one side of this stone mold is a carving of the badge, and the other is just flat, except for that funnel that the ore is going to come through. In image 2, you see the 2 pieces, the mold, the 2 pieces of stone assembled, and you're going to take your ladle of molten pewter, I have done this myself, and pour it into that mold. Then you're going to hold it closed and count to 60. That's all the time it takes. And then the pewter will harden. You'll take it apart. That's image 2. There you see our badge. You will carefully remove the badge, which is hardened just enough, take it out. There you have it, number 4. It's got that long, the funnel that's been created by pouring the pewter into the badge. You're going to break that off. It's easy to break off. And voila, you have your badge. Please note on number 5, the little eyelets. Do you see them on the corners of the image? That's where you're going to sew it onto your hat or your cloak, where others can see it. And it's going to have lovely detail, and it's going to be really, really shiny, at least in the beginning. So it's eye-catching. This is a cheap and easy process. It is easy to mass produce these objects. It's easy to recycle the pewter. It's easy to use the molds again and again. And here you have a very beautiful mold that was found in an archaeological site of, this is St. Michael slaying the dragon. Surviving textual sources and medieval images, such as portraits, altarpieces, and so on, make it clear that badges were in fact manufactured from other materials, precious ones, silver and gold, and also really ephemeral materials, such as paper mache, cloth, or embroidery. But for different reasons, right, those sorts of badges rarely survive. But pewter survives fairly well, and it can show lots of detail. And you see here how this stone mold really is going to take advantage of that detail that the lead can show, but the pewter can show, with all kinds of details on the face and the feathers on the wings and so on. And it would have been, as I said, very, very bright and shiny. However, unfortunately, pewter tarnishes very quickly, and it's flexible, which means it is a bit fragile. So the objects you're going to see in my images are not going to be shiny, and often they are a bit banged up and fragmentary as well. All right, how common were badges in the Middle Ages? There survive in museums and private collections well over 20,000 medieval badges, surviving 20,000 medieval badges. But the material evidence surviving documentation suggests that this is a tiny fraction of the ones that were originally made and circulated. It's reasonable to suggest that over the course of the Middle Ages, millions were produced, worn, circulated, recycled, thrown away during the Middle Ages, especially north of the Alps. And what this huge number suggests is that these little objects were an ordinary and ubiquitous part of life in the high and late Middle Ages, especially in Northwestern Europe. Badges were designed to be decoded, that is to say, to be read. They're in a visual way. And the words for badges in medieval languages signal and name this communicative function quite clearly. They are called signs. Insignia, sigillum or signum, Latin, Zeichen or Teken, German or Dutch. When medieval people wore badges, they were communicating or sending a signal. And this is a kind of triangular relationship. The wearer is choosing a specific message by choosing a specific badge, because that image carries a widely known and familiar meaning. The viewer who sees this badge, which is the message, right, reads or decodes what the viewer is seeing. And I think this functions a bit like heraldry. That you have this circulation of meaning between the viewer, between the wearer, the viewer, and the message. What's special about choosing and wearing a specific badge, and up until the late Middle Ages, all badges are very specific, is that they are communicating the wearer's claim to a social relationship of some kind, whether personal, secular, religious, or political. To zoom way out on this, badges and heraldry are part of larger medieval social systems for signifying and claiming identity. And that might be that includes, as you all know as well, various forms of hair, beard, clothing, all kinds of things that signaled identity in the Middle Ages. All right, let's look at how this worked with medieval badges. We're going to look at pilgrim badges. These were made and sold at holy sites. These proliferated all across medieval Europe. The most important ones are Rome, Aachen, a place in Germany called Wilsnach, Canterbury, but there were hundreds of regional and indeed local pilgrimage sites as well. And many of these, hundreds of these, had acquired over the course of time a badge of some kind. The key feature here is that a specific image is linked to a specific site. Thus, badges from Canterbury, they are diverse in their designs, but they often feature an image of Thomas Becket, who was assassinated, you remember, I think it's 1179, and then a shrine is erected on the site of his assassination in the cathedral. That's done by 1220, and pilgrim badges are sold from Canterbury Cathedral from just a few years. In fact, almost directly after his assassination. Every pilgrim badge from Canterbury showed an image that was widely understood to immediately signal Canterbury. And this is the case for every pilgrimage badge. It made a site-specific, widely understood reference to its specific holy site. All right, what you see here is on our right, no, left, I have that thing, left. The one panel of an altarpiece that it depicts, it's from Alkmaar in the Netherlands. You got it? Yeah, the 7 works of mercy. And there's a detail on the other side where you see these 3 pilgrims in the crowd, and they're wearing pilgrim badges on their hats. Some of these are identifiable even today. And because these badges could only be acquired at the shrine where these pilgrims visited, they were understood to communicate the claim that the person wearing that badge had been to that site. Okay, so what do we have here? We have all 3 of these pilgrims are wearing Compostela scallop shell badges. These signal that they've been to the shrine of St. James in Compostela, Spain, which is arguably, I think, still the most important and still thriving pilgrimage site in Catholicism today. And it's about 2,000 kilometers from Alkmaar in the Netherlands. What's unusual here is the really, really singular design of this badge, that actual shells could be used. That's I think almost anomalous. It's unusual. It's and that when you see a pewter badge from Compostela, it's made in the shape of a shell, of this scallop shell. This stability of this one design for this site is unusual, and it's also remarkable that this design survives into our day. We also have these, not the circled image, I'm going to talk about that, but the blue cloaked pilgrim has these cross staves on his cloak and also on his hat, and those are also probably signs from Compostela. But the fellow in the middle has what is identifiable as a badge with crossed keys and a papal tiara, and this is a badge from Rome, which is about 1,700 kilometers from Alkmaar. I emphasize these distances because the pilgrims are understood to have walked this entire distance. And here I just wanted to show you a second badge that is a very common design from Rome. And you can see that it's quite different than the crossed keys and tiara badge. But many, many, many of these St. Peter and St. Paul, these rectangular badges also survive. So it's also immediately recognizable as being from Rome. And also it happens to have an inscription that says in Latin, that says this is from Rome. Finally, the other badges here, there's a round badge on the hat of the man with a brown hat that looks like a badge from Aachen, which is about only 250 kilometers from Alkmaar. And finally, the man in the middle who's wearing the Rome badge also has a badge on his hat that appears to be from Alkmaar itself, where there was a precious blood relic site that had been worshipped since about 1430. So at the time that this altarpiece is made, that shrine is relatively young. It's only about 70 years old. So the badges, these badges effortlessly signaled a specific place and connection to the viewers who saw them, to especially Rome and Compostela. These images would have been so familiar that basically everyone in the medieval world would have known what they meant. Many badges would in fact have depended more on the viewer having local or regional contextual information. It's not certain, for example, that an Alkmaar badge would have been immediately recognizable to someone, say, in Hamburg or Lübeck, where badges from smaller sites that were very close to home were very popular. All right, let's ask this question. What kind of work are these recognizable representations of medieval badges doing in this painting? I ask you to look again at the complete panel and at this street scene. Look at how orderly everything is, how clean everything is, how piously everyone is moving and standing. Even Christ is standing at the back of the crowd of wanderers, seeming to approve of what's happening. So this anonymous painter chose to create an idealizing cityscape as the setting for depicting this religious and civic virtue. There's no difference between the two in this painting, is there? Being enacted by the burghers of Alkmaar. The painter also went to the trouble of depicting these specific badges realistically. And so we see the hometown badge from Alkmaar standing side by side with badges from the most venerable and charismatic pilgrim sites in Western Europe, sites that enjoyed a prominence that Alkmaar never came close to matching. The painted badges remind the viewer of the network of holy shrines and charismatic sites that was an integral part of the religious landscape of Western Europe. And they visualize Alkmaar as an idealized religious community into this network, so that this huge network transcends national, political, linguistic, and social boundaries. It elevates the status of Aachen's shrine by placing its badge alongside those of Compostela, Aachen, and Rome, suggesting perhaps the hometown's aspirations or hopes that Alkmaar's shrine attains similar visibility and spiritual clout. I want to extrapolate from this painting a fundamental quality of all badges. The kinds of belonging signaled by badges are not necessarily representations of something real and existing. They are also claims to belonging that must be validated by wearers and viewers. There were also many secular badges, and I want to, at least just before we close part one, show you just a few of them. Some of these secular badges are amazingly inventive, ribald, even a bit obscene, and they present us with mysteries, I think, because we don't know with any specificity. This really contrasts with the pilgrim badges. For these, what I call ludic, comic, obscene badges, we simply don't know, and I've tried to figure it out, for what occasions they were made, what they are supposed to say, who wore them. But indeed, here are three with relatively common ludic images: a crowned belled walking penis with wings and tail, found in the Low Countries, a vulva dressed as a pilgrim holding a staff and a rosary, and finally a little fool badge, with it has a beard, sticking his tongue out at you, the viewer. I hope you enjoy these remarkable medieval confections. I also want to show you some surviving badges featuring familiar secular symbolism, the heart, the sign of tender attachment, but here I think presented in ways that are in one case still legible to us today, a pin with a heart and a crowned heart and with a space probably to put in a piece of something, a piece of paper, something painted, a little painting. That's on the left. And then this wonderful, strange image of the solemn looking woman holding a heart with an anatomically correct heart with an arrow in it through her hands. Okay, we have come to our first break. Sarah and I'm going to, hey, everybody's back. Thank you. I hope that worked. And I'll find out during the question and answer period. So in part 2, we're going to talk about secular badges and heraldry, secular, especially secular political badges. And there we go. And I'm going to focus first on devices, which of course, I know many of you, you're doubtlessly familiar with this. A device is an image that a person that is associated with a personal image of some kind. By personal, I mean, well, it could be a civic organization, a noble lord, or an elite household. And when you wore it, the bearer is claiming a connection to that organization, that household, or that lord. They can be understood, I think, within the ambit of heraldry. So these political badges, political devices are typically self-chosen. You choose whether or not you want what it looks like. They can come and go. Noble lords and ladies might choose different devices over the course of their lifetime, civic organizations as well, or they might make a specific device for a very specific event. This means that they were retirable. You could use it and set it aside at some point, and they were usually voluntary. They also had, because they have these specific social and political associations, you're asserting a personal affiliation when you wear it. You're broadcasting a claim to belong to some kind of an association. So there are lots of portraits from the late Middle Ages of sitters who are shown wearing their devices. They're showing the viewer through these chosen symbols a lot more about where they see themselves belonging politically. I'm showing you an example here, one that you might not know. This is a portrait of the Austrian nobleman, diplomat, and poet Oswald von Wolkenstein, who died in 1445. This is a very small portrait, and it opens a compilation of his poetry. He was a great poet. He oversaw this compilation himself, and he must have overseen having this miniature made, which opens the actual manuscript. Everyone wonders about that closed eye. He is not winking. He appears to have actually been either born without a second eye or to have lost an eye early in childhood, which did not inhibit his career as a diplomat, warrior, trader, quarreler, politician. A very interesting life. So he has chosen to have himself depicted here with the two of the most distinguished honors that he received during his lifetime, the badge, the dragon, and the griffin are from the confraternity of the guild of his overlord, King Sigismund, and also the lilies on the pin are this is the Order of the Jar, I believe, which was founded by Queen Isabella in Spain. And please note that the jars are also woven into the textile of the robe that he is wearing. So we have here a nice example of badges being, this political device being reproduced in another material in the garment itself. Okay. This is a Talbot. This is a livery badge. This is a Talbot Spaniel. It has a little collar with the TA Talbot, and the Talbot family is one of the great elite families of 15th century England, and about 23 of these little Talbot badges survive. They're clearly livery badges worn by members of or supporters of the Talbot family. Next slide are swans. There are many swans, and many of the swans have wonderful mottos. This one says, "I await your mercy," found in France. And I wanted to contrast, many of the swans that were actually found in the UK and in the Low Countries, they appear to be, again, political devices. Just again to contrast the precious and the ordinary materials, this Dunstable swan jewel, this small, absolutely glorious object, was, it's from the 15th century and it was found in an excavation. And it is possible that this is a kind of badge, that it was gifted from one elite person to another elite person, bearing with the personal device of the giver, probably. I also wanted to show you the crossbow. From the Low Countries, you find lots and lots of these little crossbow badges. And I wanted to show you, together with that, an actually early modern group portrait from Amsterdam of the banquet of the members of Amsterdam's Crossbow Civic Guard. This is just a detail, but you see circled here that they are all in fact wearing a little crossbow badge pinned onto the sleeves of their garments. Finally, no, not finally yet, one of my favorite badges found in France, a greyhound. A greyhound is a symbol of virtue and nobility. It is a noble dog. And this crouching greyhound with a collar is also reclining on a banderole with the caption, "Bien-être qui m'importe," something like, "May virtue come to him who carries me." This is an example of a speaking badge. The badge itself is speaking, and it's speaking of nobility. We also have badges where heraldry shows up as a part of the, I would sort of say, necessary signaling of what the badge is about. And here we have a wonderful small object, as you all recognize, a jousting knight on horseback wearing a crested tournament helmet, and he's carrying a shield with heraldry on it. One of the big questions is, for me, there are a number of badges like this, is who wore this? Who wore something like this? I've seen a lot of badges featuring knights, and often they stand on a little stand about this big. In other words, they are not meant to be worn. They are meant to be played with. Medieval children were given knights on horseback as to playthings. And as my final image from this section, before we go indeed very quickly to our breakout room number 2, is one of the most wonderful and astonishing finds for me from the last about 5 years. This is a stone mold found in Magdeburg, Germany. The archaeologists who find it say that because of the situation where they found it, the dating is secure to the mid-13th century, which is, for my mind, early. And what you see here is a mold for making a toy knight. Can you see how this is made? This toy knight has a detachable shield and sword. They're going to be made as the same time as the knight is poured. The material, it's obviously going to be turned upside down, but the little shield will be created, and there's a space for the child to put the shield onto give it to the rider. And the rider is wearing one of these wonderful crested tournament helmets. And I want to point out something else that I noticed looking at this particular object, which is going to make this very small toy knight. There's something very unusual about it. This figure, this face, this toy knight is looking directly at you. The visor isn't closed, the visor is up, and the eyes are looking directly at us. And this is really unusual on the knight badges, that the badge, that the little statue is looking directly at the viewer. And I do wonder if this has something to do with its function as a toy, that it engages the child in a gaze, looks at the child, and the child looks back and invents and imagines a story with this object. I think we're ready to go. Again, part 3, crossover between the secular and the religious. The division between religious and secular badges that I've employed in this talk is, as you all know, largely spurious. To think of these as opposing categories is an artifact of modern thought that is still operational today in the West, and for most of us, rightly so. But to read it back onto the Middle Ages obscures more than it reveals. So what I want to do in this last brief section is to share some crossover examples where the religious and the secular simultaneously create meaning together with them. This is typical medieval, this is complexity, the kind of complexity that we see in the Middle Ages. And it reminds us that badges represent complex visual modes of symbolic communication that were semantically open, that worked with ambiguity, and that depended on contextual knowledge. It is possible to lie with a badge, and there is evidence that people did so sometimes. And you can make jokes with badges as well. And I want to recall for you here a joke badge, which is a crossover between secular and religious, the vulva dressed as a pilgrim and holding a staff and rosary, found in Amsterdam and from probably around the year 1400. A ludic crossover badge. Additionally, while the vast majority of badges were worn voluntarily, were self-chosen, retirable, and flexible, we know of compelled badges as well. Mostly our knowledge comes from textual sources, but a very few images do survive. The most notorious and disturbing of these compelled badges are Jewish badges, which made religious difference visible for secular political ends. And this is a very late image, a colored woodcut in a printed book, an early legal primer. And here you see Jews swearing an oath to their overlord using a Hebrew Bible, and the badges on their shoulders have been circled for you in the detail. Heraldry is present in religious badges as well. Many martial saints are presented with heraldry. Here is Saint George, very familiar to all of us, dressed as a knight in full regalia, which must include heraldry. He's got or the idea of heraldry. Here we have another mold from the same archaeological site as the previous Saint Michael mold, and here we have the young archangel without his wings, but dressed in typical armor from the mid-15th century and holding a wonderful small shield with fleur-de-lis on it. Here we have another political badge, this one from the time of the French Civil War. And this is the political device of John, the fearless Duke of Burgundy, who you may remember, had his cousin, the Duke of Orleans, brother of Mad King Charles, assassinated in 1407. And we can, if you wish, we can go over the mixture of secular political devices and religious symbols, Saint Andrew foremost among them, that are all joined here on John the Fearless's political device. And I close finally with a very late medieval badge from Aarschot in Belgium, the Virgin of Aarschot, a miracle working statue from the cathedral there. This site was actively promoted by one of the great families of the area, the Croix family. And here you see it's very broken. There are coats of arms on two sides of her, and then these funny poles that are on either side of the Virgin and Child. On one of them is in fact hanging a golden fleece, because the Croix family were some of the wearers of the golden fleece. So religious and political imagery seamlessly blending into one another to make a political and a religious claims at the same time. I want to close with just a final thought. Surviving badges are vestiges that allow us to glimpse medieval people as active agents who broadcast claims to affiliation and belonging. They broadcast claims to who they are and where they belong. As in heraldry, they do this actively and agentively. How modern of them to do so? Or do we perhaps have more in common with medieval people than we realize? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Shall we move on to the Q&A portion?
Yes, please. Yes, yes.
Great. So everyone, if you have a question, please use the raise hand function to ask it, and I will call on you, or drop your questions in the chat, and I can read those aloud.
Yeah, and then you call Sarah or Reed, and I'll answer.
Exactly.
I also want to say to Brian, I think, who identified the Bohun Swan, thank you for that. And someone else added the various families who use this device. This is going directly into my notes. So I won't forget.
Looks like people are still thinking of questions. So I guess I'll ask something. Oh, actually no. In the Mark Aiden asks, were badges ever painted and or enameled?
Yes, absolutely. We know that they were often painted. On my thank you slide here, down in the lower left-hand corner, you have a very big image of these three discs that have, if you can decipher them, these are the Passion of Christ, crucifixion. Well, the bottom flagellation, then top left crucifixion, and then top right, he's ascending from the tomb. This is from Wilsnach. It was painted red because there was and we know this from depictions of this badge on altarpieces and paintings, where it either has red dots or it's just completely painted red. But there are also many of these badges survive, and very few of them have survived with traces of the original paint. We also know that badges that have a lot of that are basically open, we know that they had some kind of backing in them. A very few of these also, the backings also survive. There's another image of that. There's another badge like that here on this thank you slide. And we don't know, nobody has looked to do the analysis to figure out what the heck this stuff is. That the badge here beside the Wilsnach badge also has, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it has little things that look like gemstones. They're just ordinary stones on them. So the answer is emphatically yes, they were embellished in many ways. And again, if you think of them as being bright and shiny as the pewter originally was, then they would have had little stones and they were shiny and they would have had paint on them. They were quite eye-catching objects.
Oh, Matthew Wallace asks, Wallace Gross asks, what was the rationale behind the phallus and vulva symbolism in some of the pilgrim badges?
We don't know. Well, so there survive comic stories from German speaking and from some from French that tell the stories of phalluses or vulvas who get separated from their people and go out and have adventures of various kinds. So I think so. The larger answer to the question is we don't know. They appear I think that they belong to a specific time of the year in the medieval sort of seasonal cycle. I think they belong to the Fasching, or to the times of year, to carnival times, when people did all kinds of crazy things in the Middle Ages. We have from Germany, again, where legal records or police records exist, we have surviving from Nuremberg police records from the 15th century, we have citizens' complaints, not to the police, they complained to the municipal council that during the carnival times, people have been doing lewd things in the city streets, such as parading phallic statues through the street. So it doesn't appear that the civic authorities sanctioned anybody for these behaviors. But what these complaints tell us was that there were times of year when lewd behavior was tolerated, at least by some segments of city populations, even though it was considered rude and indecent by others. And I think that these wonderful badges somehow belong to that world. And my final hypothesis on that is, because we know that political devices were used to signal affiliation with a specific group, perhaps these are devices for carnival season confraternities or guilds of some kind.
That's very interesting, and would make sense. George Shields asks, do any badges survive in forms other than devices for clothing? For example, do we find personal property stamped, engraved, etc., with badges as a mark of ownership?
That's a good question. So I think probably for secular badges, when they overlap with devices and they overlap with heraldry, then yes. Yes.
Oh, as a follow-up to the question on phallic and vulvic images from Taylor Cause, they ask, from someone with a simple knowledge of this, was there communal rejection of such vulgar devices / badges?
No, is the really simple answer. No, there is not. No. The Middle Age, in this way, the late Middle Ages are specifically are very much like our times. You have clamorous debate. You have groups who really differ. You have priests railing against, or priests or other, or people who have others, a civic father or mother perhaps thinks that you really sermonizing and saying this is terrible, and copious evidence that it goes on regardless. So you have a society where there is not agreement on what the proper place and purpose is of some of these more lewd or objectionable image goings on and behaviors. Carnival was quite riotous. We know quite a bit about it from the Low Countries and from German-speaking lands, in part because of these complaint records, which are fantastic. They're really interesting to read. And we have complaint people, we know people streaking. You remember streaking? All of you remember this from college campuses? Ages ago, there were complaints about this. We know that in some cities in Germany, one of the days of Carnival Week was reserved for women. And women got to run riot in the streets and men were supposed to stay in. And one reason we know this is because this Sigismund, who I referred to indirectly, his grand order for elite noblemen, Oswald is wearing his badge. We know from a record, a city chronicle, that Sigismund came and took part in carnival in a southern German city, and he took for himself the prerogative to be the only man to run and spend Weiberfastnacht with the women on Women's Carnival Day.
I guess
He was the emperor, he got to take part. He took for himself the right to take part.
someone comment, Matthew Wallace Gross comments, it must have been hard to wear one's badge while streaking.
Yes, it must have been very hard. Indeed, yes.
And also, I guess, sort of on the subject of carnivals, Carl Gagnon asks, could many of the badges have been trinkets for events that people could get at the festivals, like for tournaments and events that, in a way that might be what, like today, tourist trinkets?
Yes, I think so. I think there's some evidence of this, in the Low Countries. The Low Countries did spectacular city celebrations of all kinds, for peace treaties, for big trade days. The cities had, is it Ypres? I think it's in Ypres, they had an annual festival to celebrate the breaking of a siege. And we know that sometimes if for specific tournaments or for big if a treaty is signed, that the cities will have a badge made for that time, for that event. Now, I wonder myself, there are a lot of these little badges that show a knight, a knight on horseback. And I wonder if they weren't in fact made for exactly as you suggest, made for the onlookers, for the people who come to watch to watch this and to sort of say, I was there, I watched the tournament.
Okay. Because it's called Gagnon here. We have something similar years ago when the Quebec Winter Festival.
Yes.
There was a different figurine every year. And people would basically hang them and say, I was there from that year to that year.
Yes, that's the afterlife of badges, and the afterlife of badges is basically continual in Catholic, in many Catholic regions. I was able to look at it, so particularly votive badges, but in this case also, what you're describing is a kind of a use that's secular, but that really can emerge seamlessly out of religious practices as well, right? A kind of crossover, not in its meaning, but in use. I saw a catalog recently, a new catalog from Slovenia, of badges in the National Museum in Slovenia, and they are all Marian badges from pilgrimage sites there, and they are all early modern. None of them are medieval. And that was a revelation to me that this practice this practice of wearing religious badges the badges are manufactured also in Southern Europe, but they're overwhelmingly found in the North. They're overwhelmingly found in those parts of Europe that became Protestant, where they were also manufactured, right, at all of these big sites, Canterbury, Wilsnach, all of the sites up, and there were lots of sites in Denmark. All of these sites disappear with the Reformation. The sites disappear and badge use disappears, but badge use continues in Bavaria, for example. and grows, and then it grows in other Catholic parts of Europe as well. And I find that's something that's not, I know of no research on this, the long history of badges. The use of badges in Germany on walking staves. Have any of you seen this? How Germans collect? Yeah, I see heads nodding. Well, this is a kind of badge use, right? And you put it on your walking staff, and you have this record and images of where you've been. That's, again, immediately legible to almost anyone who has shared these journeying practices. So,
okay, but you see that even if in some tourists with all the pins they wear on their hat.
yeah.
I don't know how many jacket I've seen with pins that the person will sink if they fall in the water because it's so heavy. Or the scout fire blanket.
Yes, I didn't want to suggest that it's only in Bavaria. That's just where, because my field of specialization is in German-speaking lands, I know that best, but indeed it survives in other places. And again, it's one of the many aspects of these objects. You know, when you're a researcher, as you know, you start into a new field of research thinking you're going to find one thing, and then you open a door and you realize you're in this enormous building with all kinds of possibilities and rooms and gardens and places to go, and you have to track your first path through them, passing by leaving many doors unopened, and understanding this long afterlife is one of the aspects of badges that I'd like to do more with, to bring my understanding of them into the modern world, and how their use and meaning changes over time.
That's, yeah. Yeah, the afterlives of these objects is always really interesting to me. Carl Gagnon asks, could some of the badges have been signs of belonging to certain parties?
Yes, absolutely. So there's yes, and the badge of, yes, John the Fearless. So in the Parisian Civil War, which happens in the 1440s, I think, with John the Fearless and the Orléans. Yes, the badges of the two parties were used as signs of political affiliation, and they were absolutely understood that way, and they were worn by everybody. There's a historian, Simon Slonica, who has written about this, and who's written about the fact that there's some of the noble commentators in this time period become a bit exercised over the fact that these badges are being worn by everybody. Everybody's taking sides. So from the noble commentators' perspective, they should really only noble people and those directly affiliated in their household should be wearing them. But what's happening in the Civil War in Paris is that everybody is adopting them. Women, are wearing them to take sides.
No, that's fascinating that it was such like a communal form of signifying
participation. Well, I mean, according to her research, it's the populace makes it that.
Right. This is sort of a joking comment slash question. Ian Steingeisner asks, so what you're saying is that for almost 8 centuries, nothing much has changed?
I hope what I think really I'm trying to say is that as a professional medievalist, somebody who teaches medieval studies and who watches films about the Middle Ages and cartoons and all of this, medieval people are so, and I often ask my students, I'll ask them, how do you think medieval people lived? What were they like? And they say medieval people were pious, God-fearing, submissive. They knew their place, and long-suffering and silent. And this is just not so. And that's why I think I emphasize a bit, overemphasize that they also lived in a world of debate, and they also had, took agency in saying to others who they saw themselves as being. Obviously what that meant to be someone or to be this, to identify in one way or another way was different for them than it is for us, because identities were really understood to be what we would call corporate identities, you know, to belong to a certain group of people. And our modern world emphasizes individuality so much. But I think when you spend so much time thinking about how medieval people saw the world, what you begin to see is that how much the constructs in our world today are I don't know, they're chimera. They're, you know, the whole idea that we are, you know, like in Monty Python, we are all individuals. How much individuality is really a shared collective construct that we socially adopt.
Who among us do not have a box full of lapel pins, which are basically badges?
Yes, lapel pins are badges. Absolutely, they are badges.
Yeah, no, it is interesting, and it's also, I mean, that also kind of goes back to what you were saying about it. It is partly the viewer that kind of has to confirm this signification.
Yeah.
So it is all sort of a collective agreement, identities then and now.
Which is why you can lie with them.
Right.
Which is also why there's a big controversy in the late 14th century in England that my colleague Jennifer Lee has written about. One of the big royal families, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it is, sends someone around with badges to various towns, to people who are sort of, you know, who are a part of his estates. And these people to whom these badges are brought, they object. They say, we don't want to wear them because we want to choose, you're compelling us to wear this sign of identification with you, and we don't want to do that. So they push back against the authority. And what's interesting for me is that they push back because they see this sign that the Lord is having brought to them as a signal of a political affiliation that they don't want. So they read the badge and they say no.
It's interesting that would be so contentious, but yeah, it
Yeah,
makes sense.
exactly. This is contentious. When people in Nuremberg complain about lewd behavior at carnival, it's because it's not because it didn't happen or because it has to be sanctioned, but because it's contentious.
All right, so we are in the last minute. So does anyone have any other questions before we wrap up?
I was wondering if in the current era, colors, plain colors, can also act as badges.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
they do. I think that would be yeah. Yes, they do. They act as badges. Green. Yeah. If any of you have any more thoughts about some of the badges that you've seen, insights, knowledge, please email me or email Sarah and she'll forward the email to me. I welcome your expertise and knowledge. If you had any thoughts about the badges that we showed you that I showed you at the breakout room too, please shoot me an email and let me know. And I hope that you found this interesting to think about the way heraldry is a part of so many visual systems of signification in the medieval world, and how sophisticated medieval people must have been in their visual literacy.